A disguised millionaire was humiliated in public after his card was declined 3 times at the supermarket. The manager, unaware of who he was dealing with, treated him like a nuisance before a silent crowd. But it was a black cleaning lady, ignored by everyone, who showed the most powerful act of all. What she did there not only exposed prejudice, it turned the tables on an entire company. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing. Another day began at the New Dawn supermarket, located in downtown Silverport. Amidst the aisles filled with products and the constant flow of customers, the cleaner, Louisa Fisher, vigorously scrubbed the floor, eliminating hurried footprints that had accumulated since opening. At 42, Louisa bore the marks of a life of sacrifices on her face. A widow for 5 years, she single-handedly supported her 3 children with her minimum wage and some extra cleaning jobs she managed on weekends. On that Tuesday morning, the activity was particularly intense. Rushed executives bought quick snacks, housewives filled carts with weekly specials, and teenagers wandered through the candy aisles. Louisa moved discreetly, avoiding disturbing customers, as if her work and she herself needed to remain invisible. "Mrs. Fisher, aisle 3, someone spilled soda," shouted the operations supervisor without even looking at her. Quickly, she pushed her cleaning cart towards the indicated spot. As she cleaned the sticky puddle, she noticed an elderly gentleman slowly entering through the main door. There was something different about him that caught her attention. Perhaps it was the way his eyes scanned every detail of the environment, or his posture which, despite apparent fragility, exuded a silent dignity. The man appeared to be around 70, dressed in simple, worn clothes, a faded plaid shirt, cotton trousers that had seen better days, and a straw hat weathered by time. His shoes, though clean, showed clear signs of extensive use. With slow steps, he took a shopping cart and began his journey through the supermarket aisles. Louisa continued her work, but her eyes occasionally returned to that gentleman. There was something in his meticulous gestures that didn't match his simple appearance. He examined each product carefully, checking expiry dates, ingredients, and prices, like someone who deeply understood the value of things. On the other side of the store, Richard Matthews, the general manager, observed his team with his usual rigor. At 38, he had achieved his position after years of dedication to the New Dawn chain. Impeccably dressed in his business uniform, Richard firmly believed that appearance defined people's character and worth. This philosophy was reflected in his management style and the constant lectures he gave his team. Remember, image is everything. Well-dressed customers deserve special attention. "They are the ones who keep our store running," he used to say in morning meetings. The man in the hat continued his shopping, adding basic but superior quality items to his cart: imported olive oil, gourmet coffee, premium cuts of meat, selected fruits. His cart quickly filled with an intriguing mix of essential products and premium items that did not match his humble appearance. Meanwhile, in the monitoring room, young Peter Oliver, newly hired for security, watched the cameras with boredom. His eyes stopped on the figure of the elderly gentleman. "Hey Mark, take a look at this old guy. Dressed like a tramp but buying expensive stuff. Could it be a scam?" he asked his colleague. "Better tell Richard. He loves dealing with these suspicious cases," Mark replied with a malicious grin. In the fruit section, Louisa was finishing restocking some fallen oranges when she noticed the gentleman choosing mangoes with surgical precision, testing each one by aroma and consistency. His gestures were those of someone who deeply knew the product. "You really know your fruits, don't you, sir?" Louisa commented, breaking her usual silence. The elderly man smiled, revealing well-cared-for teeth that contrasted with his overall appearance. "My dear, when you've lived as long as I have, you learn to appreciate the small things. A perfectly ripe mango is one of life's simple pleasures," he replied with a calm and educated voice, carrying a refined accent. Louisa smiled back, feeling strangely comfortable with the gentleman. There was something in his eyes, a glint of wisdom and kindness that made her momentarily forget the worries she carried: the overdue rent, the school supplies she needed to buy for her children, the doctor's appointment she had been postponing for months due to lack of money. The gentleman, who introduced himself only as Anthony, continued his methodical shopping. Passing by the bakery section, He stopped to chat briefly with the attendant, praising the aroma of the fresh bread and asking about the manufacturing process with surprising knowledge. The employee, initially suspicious due to his appearance, was soon charmed by his kindness and genuine interest. Richard observed from a distance, bothered by the presence of that simple man in his store. For him, the new Dawn in the downtown area should primarily cater to more affluent clientele, and the presence of humble-looking people could deter premium customers. After almost 2 hours of careful shopping, Mr. Anthony finally headed to the checkout. His cart was full, with products that would total a considerable value. In line, some people looked with curiosity and even disdain at the simple-looking gentleman with such a full cart. Louisa, who was now cleaning the windows near the checkout area, continued to observe discreetly. When his turn came, the cashier, Camilla, greeted him with an automatic smile that quickly turned into suspicion upon seeing the quantity of expensive items in the cart. With mechanical efficiency, she began scanning the products as the value on the display rapidly increased. "That's $1,376.42. Sir, Camilla finally informed him. Mr. Anthony took a worn leather wallet from his pocket, and from it a bank card that, like his appearance, seemed worn by time. "You can run it as credit, please," he said calmly. Camilla took the card with visible hesitation, examining it for a few seconds longer than necessary, before swiping it through the machine. The terminal emitted a sharp sound of denial. "Sir, your card was declined," she informed him, returning it. "That's strange. Could you please try again?" "There must be some mistake," Anthony replied, showing no concern. Camilla tried once more with the same negative result. A small queue was already beginning to form behind him, and impatient glances multiplied. "I'll try one more time," she said, now visibly uncomfortable. Third attempt, third denial. The murmur of customers in line grew, and the embarrassment was palpable. Mr. Anthony remained calm, although a shadow of concern began to cross his gaze. "Is there a problem here?" Richard's authoritative voice appeared, alerted by Camilla through the internal code for problematic situations. The atmosphere at the checkout instantly changed with the manager's arrival. Louisa, who remained nearby, stopped her work to observe the unfolding scene. "This gentleman's card has been declined 3 times, Camilla explained in a low voice. Richard looked Anthony up and down, barely disguising his judgment. Tension grew in the air, and the ordinary day at New Dawn supermarket was about to turn into something far beyond the ordinary. Richard Matthews adjusted his tie and adopted his most imposing posture. For him, that situation was more than a simple operational problem. It was an opportunity to demonstrate his authority and reinforce the values he so cherished. "Sir, it seems we have a problem with your payment," he said in a raised tone, making sure to be heard by nearby customers. "Unfortunately, we cannot release the merchandise without payment confirmation." Mr. Anthony remained calm, although embarrassment began to color his wrinkled face. "I understand perfectly, young man. Perhaps there's a technical issue with the system. I can call my bank and check." Richard looked at the cart full of products, then at the elderly man's simple clothes, and made his decision based purely on appearances. "We'll need to free up this checkout for other customers. If you could move aside with your cart." He gestured towards a remote corner of the store, like someone removing an inconvenient obstacle. By this point, several customers were observing the scene, some with discomfort, others with the morbid curiosity of someone watching a traffic accident, unable to look away, but happy not to be involved. "Camilla, call someone to return these products to the shelves," Richard ordered, without giving the elderly man a chance to resolve the situation. Then, as if that weren't enough, he turned to 2 young employees who were observing the scene. "Pay attention, lads. This is why I always insist on the importance of appearance. When someone presents themselves like this," he made a dismissive gesture towards Mr. Anthony, "and tries to make purchases of this value, we need to be vigilant." Mr. Anthony remained silent, but something in his gaze changed. It wasn't anger or indignation. It was a deep sadness mixed with keen observation, as if every word and gesture were being carefully recorded. Across the aisle, Louisa felt her heart race. What she witnessed went far beyond customer service protocol. It was a public humiliation based purely on prejudice. That scene was painfully familiar to her. How many times had she herself not been treated as invisible or less worthy because of her appearance, color, or profession? "Mr. Manager, if you'll allow me—" Mr. Anthony tried to intervene in a calm voice. "Don't worry, we're already handling it," Richard cut him off with false cordiality. "Paul, please escort this gentleman to the exit. And make sure all products are returned correctly." The young employee, visibly uncomfortable with the situation, approached the elderly man as one would approach a contaminated object. It was at that moment that something broke inside Louisa. Years of silence and submission in the face of injustice seemed to weigh more heavily on her shoulders than ever. In her mind, a whirlwind of thoughts and calculations formed. The value of that purchase would certainly exceed half of her monthly salary, which meant more difficulties paying rent, perhaps postponing again the purchase of glasses her eldest son so desperately needed for studying, or cancelling tutoring lessons for her daughter who struggled with math. Even so, something stronger propelled her. With silent determination, Louisa leaned her mop against the cleaning cart and walked towards the checkout, attracting surprised glances from those present. "I will pay for the gentleman's purchase," she announced in a firm voice, though her hands trembled slightly. An astonished silence fell over the area. Richard looked at her as if she had completely lost her mind. "What was that, Mrs. Fisher?" he asked, a mix of disbelief and irritation. "I said I will pay for this gentleman's purchase," she repeated now more firmly. From her uniform pocket, she took out her bank card where she kept her hard-earned savings. Richard let out a short, dry laugh. "Do you realize the amount? It's almost $2,000. "I am fully aware, Mr. Matthews," Louisa replied, maintaining her dignity. "And still, I insist on paying." Mr. Anthony looked at her with an indescribable expression, a mixture of surprise, gratitude, and something more, something no one there could fully identify. "You don't have to do this, my dear lady," the elderly man said softly. "I know I don't have to." "I want to," Louisa replied without looking away. Other employees began to approach, drawn by the unusual scene. Camilla, the cashier, seemed torn between following Richard's implicit orders and accepting Louisa's gesture. "This is absurd," Richard murmured, but without his previous conviction. The unexpected gesture had destabilized his script of authority. It was then that Martha, another cashier observing the scene from afar, stepped forward. "If Mrs. Fisher is paying half, I'll pay the other half," she offered to general astonishment. Richard felt control of the situation completely slipping away. What had begun as a demonstration of his power and discernment was rapidly turning into an act of collective rebellion. "This is against company policy," he tried to argue, though everyone knew no such policy existed. "What policy, Mr. Matthews?" asked Paul, the young employee who had previously been assigned to escort the elderly man out. "The one that says we can't help a customer in need?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Other employees approached, forming a small circle of solidarity around the elderly man and Louisa. The tense atmosphere had transformed into something different, a kind of silent rebellion against years of discriminatory treatment that everyone had witnessed or experienced. "If you'll allow me—" "I accept your kindness, madam," Mr. Anthony finally said, addressing Louisa with a respect that few customers showed cleaning staff. "But I insist on reimbursing every penny as soon as I resolve this issue with my bank." Louisa nodded and extended her card to Camilla. Richard, realizing he had completely lost control of the situation, stepped back a few paces, watching with a mixture of indignation and disbelief. Camilla swiped Louisa's card through the terminal. The small machine processed the information for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. Finally, the approval beep sounded, causing a wave of relief among those present. "Payment approved," Camilla announced, with a small smile. A murmur of approval rippled through the group of employees and customers watching. Louisa felt a mix of pride and apprehension. Pride for what she had just done. Apprehension for the financial consequences she would face. "Thank you very much." "My dear lady," Mr. Anthony said, gently holding Louisa's hand in his. "Your name, please." "Louisa. Louisa Fisher." "Mrs. Louisa Fisher, you have just given me a lesson in humanity that I will never forget," he declared with a formality that seemed out of place in his simple figure. Richard, partially regaining his composure, approached again. "Well, since the situation has been resolved," he said with disdain, We can continue with our activities. Mrs. Fisher, return to your workstation immediately. We'll discuss this breach of protocol later." The veiled threat did not go unnoticed. Louisa felt a chill, thinking of the risk she had just taken. Losing that job would be catastrophic for her family. It was then that Mr. Anthony slowly turned to Richard, and something in his gaze made the manager instinctively take a step back. "Young man, I'd like you to gather the entire store team, please. I have an important announcement to make," the elderly man said, with surprising authority. "You are not in a position to make demands," Richard replied, recovering his arrogant tone. Mr. Anthony smiled serenely. "You're absolutely right. I'm not making a demand as a customer." He paused briefly, taking a folded document from the inner pocket of his worn jacket. "I am giving an order as the owner of this supermarket chain." The document he carefully unfolded was an official identification from Dawnlight Corporation, the holding company that controlled the New Dawn chain and dozens of other businesses across Albion. In it, the photo of Anthony Cavendish, chairman of the board and majority shareholder, contrasted with the simple figure standing there, but they were unmistakably the same person. The silence that followed was absolute. Richard visibly paled as if he had seen a ghost. Nearby employees exchanged incredulous glances, and Louisa, for a moment, felt her legs wouldn't support her body. The entire supermarket seemed to have frozen in a moment, suspended in time. Richard Matthews, once so confident in his authority, now struggled to find words as his face alternated between pale white and intense red. Mr. Cavendish?" he finally stammered, his arrogant tone completely dissipated. "We weren't informed of your visit. If we had known—" Anthony Cavendish raised his hand in a serene gesture that immediately interrupted the manager. His posture had subtly changed. He remained simple, but now exuded a natural authority that didn't need exaggerated displays to make its presence felt. And that was precisely the intention. "Mr. Matthews," he replied in a calm but firm voice, "in recent months I have been receiving disturbing reports about the treatment of customers in our stores, especially those of humbler appearance. Reports that, unfortunately, I have just personally verified." The circle of employees and customers around them had grown. Murmurs of astonishment spread through the aisles like waves. Louisa remained motionless, still processing what had just happened. The man whose purchase she had offered to pay for, sacrificing more than half of her salary, was in fact one of the wealthiest businessmen in the country. Anthony turned to Louisa with a look of deep respect. "Mrs. Fisher, you have no idea of the greatness of the gesture you just made. When everyone else was swayed by appearance, you saw beyond it and acted with true humanity." Camilla, the cashier, timidly stepped forward. "Sir, about the card. Was it our fault or was there really a problem?" Anthony smiled. "The card was intentionally blocked for this test. I wanted to observe how the team would handle a customer in difficulty." His gaze swept over the group, pausing momentarily on each face. "My intention was not to expose anyone, but rather to understand what happens when I am not present. And what I saw was revealing." Richard, trying to regain some dignity, rehearsed a justification. "Mr. Cavendish, I need to explain that we follow strict security protocols. We have many cases of attempted fraud and—" "Fraud," Anthony interrupted, with a tone that mixed sadness and indignation. "The only fraud I witnessed today was the false courtesy that turns into contempt when the customer doesn't meet certain standards of appearance or status. This goes against everything we have built over 40 years in this company." A heavy silence fell over the area. Several employees lowered their eyes, acknowledging the truth in those words. Others exchanged meaningful glances, as if they had long wanted to say the same thing. "Mr. Matthews, I'd like you to gather the entire team in the back area, please. I have an important announcement to make, and I prefer it to be away from customers' eyes." Richard nodded mechanically and began directing the employees to the break area at the back of the store. Meanwhile, Anthony approached Louisa again. "Would you come with me, please? I have something important to tell you." Louisa, still stunned by the revelation, merely nodded and followed the elderly man, now recognized as the powerful businessman Anthony Cavendish. Her thoughts were in a whirlwind, relief at not losing the money she had committed, confusion about what she had just witnessed, and a growing concern about what that man might want with her. In the back area, all the shift employees, about 30 people, gathered in a semicircle. The buzz of nervous conversation ceased when Anthony entered the room with Louisa a few steps behind. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began, in a clear and measured voice. "My name is Anthony Cavendish, and I am the founder and chairman of the board of Dawnlight Corporation, which controls this and other chains of establishments." A murmur rippled through the room. Many there had never even seen a photo of the legendary founder, who rarely appeared in public. In recent weeks, I have been visiting our stores disguised, trying to understand why we are receiving increasingly more complaints about discriminatory treatment. What I witnessed today was unfortunately no exception. It was the rule. His eyes scanned each face present without accusation, but with evident sadness. When I founded this company 4 decades ago, I established a fundamental principle: to treat every customer with dignity, regardless of their appearance or financial condition. At some point during these 40 years, that principle was lost. Richard remained in a corner, sweat visibly dripping down his forehead. He knew his job was on the line, but more than that, his professional reputation was being dismantled before everyone. What I witnessed today was the institutionalization of prejudice. I saw a customer, myself, being publicly humiliated for having a payment issue. I saw judgments based purely on appearance. I saw employees being trained to discriminate. He paused briefly, letting his words sink into everyone's consciousness. But I also saw something extraordinary. He turned to Louisa, who remained quiet, her hands crossed over her uniform. I saw an employee who, despite all the difficulties she undoubtedly faces, offered to pay for a stranger's purchase, sacrificing more than half of her monthly salary. Several glances turned to Louisa with new admiration. Some people who barely noticed her daily presence now saw her as if for the first time. And not only that, I saw other employees joining her, ready to share the cost of that help. It was a glimpse of the spirit I want to see restored in our company. Anthony walked a few steps towards Richard, who now seemed diminished without his usual authoritative posture. "Mr. Matthews, for 6 years you have held the position of manager at this unit. Reviewing customer satisfaction reports and performance evaluations, it is clear that the culture of discrimination did not begin today." Richard opened his mouth to protest, but Anthony continued, relentless in his calm. "Our policies are clear regarding respect for diversity and the dignity of every person who enters our stores, whether customer or employee. You not only violated these policies but completely subverted them, creating a toxic environment where prejudice became the norm." An absolute silence filled the room. Everyone knew what would come next. "For these reasons, I announce your immediate termination from the company for just cause." Richard paled even further, if that were possible. "Mr. Cavendish, please, I need this job. I have bills, commitments—" "As do everyone here," Anthony interrupted firmly. "The difference is that most of those present fulfill their obligations without humiliating or discriminating against other human beings." Turning back to the group, he continued, "Starting today, we are initiating a profound restructuring of the organizational culture of this and all our units. The fundamental values that have guided us for decades will be restored and strengthened." His gaze met Louisa's again, and a small smile lit up his wrinkled face. "And to lead this transformation, there's no one better than someone who has practically demonstrated the values we cherish. Mrs. Louisa Fisher, I would like to invite you to assume the customer service supervisor position for this unit." A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. Louisa felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. "Me? But, Mr. Cavendish, I'm just the cleaner. I have no formal education. I know nothing about management. You know the most important thing," Anthony gently interrupted. "You know how to see the humanity in every person, regardless of appearances. The rest can be learned." Louisa felt her eyes well up. For a moment, she thought of her children, how this opportunity would change everyone's lives. She thought of her youngest son's overdue school tuition, the elderly mother's medicine she could barely afford, the sleepless nights spent calculating how to stretch the budget until the next payday. I accept," she finally said, her voice choked. "I will give my best." Anthony nodded in approval. "I know you will. And don't worry, you'll receive all the necessary training. Your salary will be adjusted according to the new role, and you'll start immediately. Turning back to the group, he completed, "In the coming days, a human resources team will visit this unit to conduct training and reevaluate practices. I want to make it clear, in this company there is no room for discrimination or disrespect. Those who cannot adapt to this reality will have full support to seek opportunities elsewhere." The words, though firm, were spoken without hostility. Anthony Cavendish was not a man of empty threats or angry outbursts. His authority emanated naturally from decades of leadership based on solid principles. "Now, I would like to speak privately with Mrs. Fisher to discuss the details of her new role. The rest of you may return to your posts. Tomorrow we will begin a new chapter in the history of this unit." As the employees dispersed, many casting curious glances at Louisa, Richard was escorted to his office to collect his personal belongings. His expression was a mixture of shock and humiliation, the same feelings he had provoked in so many others over the years. Louisa remained motionless, still trying to process the monumental turnaround her life had just undergone. From cleaner to supervisor in a matter of minutes, from invisible to an example, from survivor to leader. "Come, Mrs. Fisher," Anthony called gently. "We have much to discuss." As she followed the elderly man towards the manager's office, a space she had only entered to clean until then, Louisa felt a confused mix of emotions: gratitude, fear, hope, and above all, a deep sense of responsibility. What had just happened was not just a change in her life, but the beginning of a transformation that would affect dozens of other people. The days that followed the extraordinary encounter at the New Dawn supermarket were a true roller coaster for Louisa. News of her sudden promotion spread quickly among employees, provoking diverse reactions, from sincere admiration to veiled resentment. For some, her story was inspiring. For others, a threat to the status quo they had accepted as immutable. The morning after the incident, Louisa arrived at the store an hour earlier than usual. She was nervous, her hands sweating as she adjusted the outfit she had carefully set aside. Navy blue dress trousers and a white blouse, the most formal ensemble she owned, saved for special occasions like her children's graduations. The feeling of being an imposter accompanied her every step, like a persistent shadow. "Good morning, Mrs. Fisher." The security guard at the entrance greeted her, with new respect in his voice. "Good morning, Claude," she replied, still unaccustomed to entering through the front door like a customer or manager, instead of the back service entrance. In the office that until the previous day belonged to Richard, a human resources team was already waiting for her. The space that had always seemed forbidden and intimidating to her would now be her workplace. Among those present, she recognized Amanda Preston, the regional manager who occasionally visited the store for inspections. "Welcome to your new role, Louisa," Amanda said with a genuine smile. "Mr. Cavendish personally instructed us to ensure your transition is as smooth as possible. We've prepared an intensive training schedule for the next 2 weeks." Louisa nodded, trying to disguise the lump in her throat. "I appreciate the trust, but I confess I'm terrified. Yesterday I was cleaning the floor, today I'm here." Amanda gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "That's precisely why you're here, Louisa. You know this store from an angle no executive ever will. You've seen how customers are treated when no one is looking. You've experienced firsthand what it's like to be invisible in the eyes of many. That experience is worth more than any MBA." In the following hours, Louisa was introduced to management systems, operational procedures, inventory control spreadsheets, and employee schedules. A completely new universe for someone who until then only knew cleaning products and cleaning schedules. Her head throbbed with so much information, but something inside her refused to give up. During lunch, she excused herself for an important call. With still trembling hands, she dialed the number of her youngest son, Matthew's school. "Madam Principal? This is Louisa Fisher, Matthew's mother from 7th grade. Yes, I'm calling about the overdue tuition. No, I'm not asking for more time. I'd like to inform you that tomorrow I will personally settle all outstanding amounts." Upon hanging up, she allowed herself a moment of contained emotion. 2 months of overdue tuition, the constant threat of seeing her son prevented from attending classes, a weight that would finally be lifted from her shoulders. With the new salary, 3 times higher than her previous one, many doors would open. That afternoon, Anthony Cavendish returned to the store for a meeting with the entire team. He was now dressed as the businessman he was, a well-tailored suit, Italian shoes, a discreet but valuable watch. The transformation was so complete that some new employees who had not been present the day before could hardly believe that elegant man had posed as a humble, elderly person. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began before the assembled team, "yesterday we witnessed a turning point in the history of this unit. Today we take the first step in the right direction." His eyes met Louisa's, who stood discreetly beside Amanda. "Our new customer service supervisor, Mrs. Louisa Fisher, will represent the fundamental values I want to see restored throughout our entire chain. Unconditional respect for every human being, regardless of their appearance or social status." A small round of applause spontaneously broke out among the employees. Louisa felt her face burn with embarrassment, but also with pride. In the coming months, all our branches will undergo a similar process of practice, re-evaluation, and team re-education. What happened here is not an isolated case, unfortunately. It is a symptom of a larger problem that I intend to eradicate. The rest of the week was an intense immersion into Louisa's new world. During the day, she absorbed technical knowledge about supermarket management. At night, she studied manuals and watched training videos, determined to compensate for her lack of formal education with double dedication. On Sunday, her first day off in her new role, Louisa gathered her 3 children in the small living room of her apartment in Silverport's suburbs. "Children, I need to tell you something important that happened this week," she began, observing the curious faces of Matthew, 12, Julia, 15, and Peter, the eldest, 17. When she finished narrating the extraordinary events of the past few days, she was met with expressions ranging from disbelief to enthusiasm. "So you're not a cleaner anymore?" Matthew asked, trying to process the change. "Now I'm a customer service supervisor," she replied with a smile. "But that doesn't mean cleaning is less dignified. It was precisely because I respected my work and that of others that I received this opportunity." Peter, always the most pragmatic, got straight to the point. "Does this mean I can take that computer science technical course, the one that costs half your old salary?" Louisa smiled, moved. "Yes, son, you can enroll tomorrow." Julia, the most observant of the 3, noticed something different about her mother beyond external circumstances. "You seem different, Mom. It's not just the new clothes or the hair, for it's the way you're sitting, the way you're talking." Louisa reflected on the comment. It was true. Something profound had changed. It wasn't just the position or the salary. It was the way she perceived herself and how she expected to be perceived by others. Years of social invisibility had created a shell of resignation that was now beginning to dissolve. "I think I'm learning to occupy my space in the world, daughter," she finally replied. The following Monday, upon arriving at the store, Louisa experienced the first real test of her new position. A customer was complaining loudly about a charge she considered undue. The cashier, visibly nervous, didn't know how to proceed. In Richard's time, the unofficial policy was clear. Problematic customers should be dealt with as quickly as possible, preferably with minimal concessions. Louisa approached calmly. "Good morning, madam. Can I help you?" The customer, a middle-aged woman with an irritated expression, turned sharply. "Finally, someone in charge. I've been trying to explain for 10 minutes that this promotional discount wasn't applied correctly." Instead of adopting a defensive posture, Louisa listened attentively, asked pertinent questions, and carefully analyzed the situation. Indeed, there was a communication flaw regarding the promotion, which led customers to error. "You are absolutely right," she finally declared. "We will correct this immediately and apply the discount. Furthermore, as a way to compensate for the inconvenience, I'd like to offer you a $50 shopping voucher for your next visit." The transformation in the customer's expression was instantaneous. From indignation to surprise and then to satisfaction. "Well, thank you for your attention. It's rare to find people who truly listen nowadays." When the satisfied customer left, Camilla, the cashier, looked at Louisa with a mixture of admiration and confusion. "Mrs. Fisher, Richard would never approve of that voucher. He used to say that complaining customers just want to take advantage." Louisa smiled. "It's exactly the opposite, Camilla. Customers who complain give us a chance to improve. Those who leave dissatisfied and say nothing are the ones who never return and also drive others away with their comments." That same afternoon, Louisa conducted her first meeting with the customer service team. Her hands were sweating and her voice initially trembled, but the sincerity of her words compensated for any lack of oratorical technique. "I worked alongside you for 5 years, cleaning the floors everyone walked on. I know what it's like to be treated as if invisible. I know what it's like to hear comments about that cleaner as if I weren't present. And that's precisely why our first mission will be to ensure that no person in this store, whether customer, supplier, or employee, ever feels invisible or less worthy." The attentive glances she received conveyed a clear message. Her history and experience brought a credibility that no diploma could confer. At the end of the workday, while organizing her new desk, still strangely large and imposing by her standards, Louisa received an unexpected call. "Mrs. Fisher, this is Anthony Cavendish. I'd like to invite you to lunch tomorrow. We need to discuss the future." Louisa's heart quickened. The future. A word that for so long had represented only more of the same. More struggle for survival, more financial juggling, more closed doors. Now suddenly future meant possibilities, growth, transformation. It would be a pleasure. "Mr. Cavendish," she replied, surprising herself with the firmness of her own voice. Upon hanging up, she allowed herself a moment of reflection by the window, overlooking the store's activity. She observed customers entering and leaving, employees serving, cleaning, organizing. That small universe that until recently saw her only as part of the furniture, now saw her as leadership. A thought emerged, clear as crystal. The true metamorphosis was not in the position, the salary, or the newfound respect. It was in the discovery of an inner strength that had always existed, but which circumstances had kept dormant. A strength that now, finally awakened, would not allow itself to fall asleep again. The Bayview Terrace restaurant was one of those establishments Louisa used to observe only from afar, with its expansive glass windows and privileged view of All Saints Bay. A place where families like hers only entered to clean or serve, never as customers. Now dressed in a newly bought navy blue suit, her first new piece of clothing in years that wasn't for her children, she walked through its doors as Anthony Cavendish's guest. "Mr. Cavendish, table for 2, please," the businessman informed the maitre d', who immediately led them to a table near the window, where the view of Silverport stretched magnificently under the midday sun. "I'm glad you accepted my invitation, Mrs. Fisher," Anthony said after they were seated. "How has this first week been?" Louisa hesitated, mentally organizing everything she wanted to share. "Intense, frightening, revealing. I think I've lived more this week than in the last 5 years." Anthony smiled, pleased with the sincerity of the answer. "And your family?" How did they react to the change? "My children are, well, I think in shock is the right expression," she replied with a shy smile. "Peter, my eldest, has already enrolled in that computer science course he dreamed of taking. Julia is less worried about bills and more focused on her studies. And Matthew, the youngest, seems to finally understand that there's a world beyond our daily struggle for survival." The waiter approached to take their orders. Louisa felt a moment of panic as she examined the menu with prices that would have seemed absurd to her before, but Anthony noticed her discomfort. "Allow me to suggest the grilled fish with passion fruit sauce." "It's the house specialty," Louisa nodded, grateful for the guidance that spared her from revealing her inexperience with sophisticated restaurants. When the waiter left, Anthony resumed the conversation in a more serious tone. "Louisa, I didn't bring you here just for a social lunch. What happened at our store last week made me rethink many aspects of how we manage our business, and I'd like to share some ideas with you." He paused, taking a sip of water. "After that incident, I requested a complete audit of all our units, specifically focused on customer service practices. The preliminary results are concerning. What we witnessed was not an isolated case, but a pattern." Louisa showed no surprise. As a cleaner, she had witnessed countless similar scenes over the years. Simple-looking customers being treated with disdain, employees instructed to keep an eye on people in humbler clothes, disparaging comments made out of earshot of those with the power to complain. "I believe we need a profound transformation in our corporate culture," Anthony continued, "and for that I need someone who understands the problem from multiple perspectives, someone who has been on both sides of the counter, so to speak." Louisa felt a chill in her stomach. Something in his tone indicated that the conversation was taking an even more unexpected turn. "Mr. Cavendish, if you're suggesting, I am offering you the position of Director of Customer Experience for the entire New Dawn chain," he declared without beating around the bush. "A new role, created specifically to implement the changes I envision. You would report directly to me and have autonomy to restructure our customer service practices across all units." Louisa fell silent. The proposal was so surprising, so beyond all expectation, that for a moment she thought she had misheard. From cleaner to supervisor had already been a gigantic leap. "Now, Director?" "Mr. Cavendish, I don't have the background for this. I barely completed high school. I've never set foot in a university." Anthony raised his hand in a gentle gesture that interrupted her objections. "Louisa, I've spent my entire life hiring people with impressive degrees who couldn't see the obvious. That respect for human dignity is the foundation of any sustainable business. You demonstrated more wisdom in one spontaneous gesture than many executives in years of their careers." The dishes arrived, momentarily interrupting the conversation. Louisa was grateful for the pause that allowed her to organize her thoughts. The fish in front of her was beautifully presented, with vibrant colors and a tempting aroma. In other times, she would have felt intimidated by such sophistication. Now, curiously, she felt increasingly at ease. "And what about my lack of corporate experience?" she asked after a few moments. "How can I lead teams of managers who have MBAs and years of experience?" Anthony smiled gently. "For that, I have a solution. You will have 2 experienced executive assistants to support you with the technical aspects, while you dedicate yourself to an intensive development program. The company will cover the costs of your degree and other necessary courses." Louisa took a deep breath, trying to absorb everything. "And where would I be based? Would I have to move to Stonehaven?" "Initially, you will remain in Silverport, but frequent travel will be necessary. When you feel prepared, we can discuss a possible transfer. Obviously, all relocation costs for your family would be covered by the company." The fish in front of her, despite its tempting aroma, remained practically untouched. Too many questions were swirling in her mind. "May I ask why me, Mr. Cavendish? There must be more qualified people, with experience in leadership positions." The businessman placed his cutlery on the plate and looked directly into her eyes. "Because businesses are made of people, Louisa, and you are the only person I know who has been at the bottom of the pyramid and still maintained her humanity intact. You have what no university can teach, genuine empathy and moral courage. The rest you can learn." At that moment, a crystal-clear certainty formed within her. This wasn't just about her life or career. It was about transforming a system that for decades had relegated people like her to the margins. It was about paving new paths. "I accept," she finally said, surprising herself with the firmness of her own voice. "With one condition. I want to maintain direct contact with operations, to spend at least 1 day a week in a store, talking to employees and customers. I cannot become an ivory tower executive." Anthony's smile widened. "That was exactly the answer I expected. And I fully agree with your condition. It is precisely this commitment to reality that makes you the right person for the job." He raised his water glass in a toast. "To the transformation that is to come." Louisa raised her own glass, finally allowing herself a full smile. "To transformation." In the weeks that followed, Louisa's life accelerated at a dizzying pace. Her first initiative as the new director was to implement a program called Tell Us the Truth, a series of discussion circles where employees of all levels could openly share their experiences and observations about customer treatment. The revelations were indeed revealing. From veiled discriminatory practices to explicit instructions to keep an eye on certain customer profiles, the pattern was consistent across almost all units. Most impressive, however, was the employees' reaction to the opportunity to finally be heard. Many confessed the discomfort they felt in following guidelines that contradicted their own personal values. They just needed permission to do what was right, Louisa explained to Anthony during an update meeting. To know that they wouldn't be punished for treating everyone with equal respect. In parallel with her new career, Louisa faced equally intense personal challenges. She had enrolled in a university-level business administration course, attending evening classes 3 times a week. On weekends, she dedicated herself to public speaking and leadership courses. The strenuous schedule was only possible thanks to the increasing support from her children, who took on more household responsibilities so their mother could study. On a particularly busy Thursday, 3 months after taking on her new role, Louisa was participating in a meeting with the Dawnlight Corporation's Executive Committee when she received an urgent message from Julia. "Mom, Peter got into computer science at university. First round!" Her eyes immediately welled up. Peter, her eldest son, had tried the public university entrance exam for the previous 2 years without success. He worked at a car wash on weekends to help with expenses and studied late into the nights, exhausted. Now finally he saw his effort rewarded. "Any problem, Louisa?" Anthony asked, noticing her sudden emotion. "On the contrary, Mr. Cavendish. My eldest son has just been accepted into computer science at the State University. The first person in our family to go to university." A wave of spontaneous applause rippled through the room. Those executives, many of whom had never faced the difficulties that families like Louisa's encountered, seemed genuinely touched. "This deserves a celebration," Anthony declared. "I suggest we conclude this meeting and continue next week. Louisa, go home and celebrate with your family. It's an important milestone." That night, in her small apartment decorated with improvised balloons, Louisa watched her 3 children with a mixture of pride and hope. Peter, now in his 3rd year of computer science, had developed an application for his final project. Julia was in her 2nd year of law and interned in the legal department of Dawnlight Corporation itself. Matthew, the youngest, was preparing for the university entrance exam for medicine, dreaming of specializing in community pediatrics. "Mom," Peter called in a calmer moment of the celebration, "do you remember when I was about 10 and you took me to work because you had no one to leave me with? Do you remember what the old manager said?" Louisa remembered perfectly. Richard had said, without caring if the boy heard, "Those kinds of people never get anywhere. From cleaner to cleaner, it's the cycle of poverty." "Yes, I remember. Son, so," Peter continued with tear-filled eyes, "today I wish he could see the director and her university student son." Louisa hugged her son tightly, finally allowing herself to cry, not tears of sadness or frustration as so many times in the past, but of pure gratitude for the present and hope for the future. That same night, before going to sleep, she received an unexpected message. It was from Camilla, the cashier who had witnessed the original incident with Mr. Anthony. "Mrs. Fisher, I need to share something incredible. Today a customer had his card blocked. Instead of embarrassment, our team discreetly took him to the customer service desk, offered him coffee while resolving the issue with his bank over the phone. The gentleman left extremely grateful and promised to return with his family. This is a direct result of the training you implemented. We are truly changing the culture of this place." Lying in bed, contemplating her bedroom ceiling, Louisa reflected on how her life had been completely transformed in just 3 months. From invisible to influential, from marginalized to a role model, from a victim of a system to an agent of transformation for that very system. And all because, at a crucial moment, she had chosen to follow her instinct for humanity instead of remaining in the safety of silence. 2 years had passed since that fateful day at the New Dawn supermarket. Silverport displayed its radiant blue sky as Louisa Fisher, now a respected executive, walked confidently through the corridors of Dawnlight Corporation's regional headquarters. Her well-tailored suit and assured posture bore no resemblance to the timid cleaner who had once scrubbed that very floor. Yet something remained unchanged, her attentive and humane gaze for every person who crossed her path. "Good morning, Mr. George," she greeted the gentleman polishing the metal handrails. "How is your grandson? Has his asthma improved?" The man smiled, genuinely touched to be remembered. "Much better, Mrs. Fisher. That health plan the company started offering made all the difference. He got the medications he needed." This type of interaction was Louisa's trademark. Even now holding the position of National Director of Customer Experience, with responsibility for over 200 stores throughout Albion, she had never lost her connection with the people who formed the base of the corporate pyramid. Her office on the 10th floor had a privileged view of All Saints Bay, but what really stood out in the room were the walls. instead of the usual diplomas and certificates, although these were also there, earned with great effort in evening courses. What dominated the space were photographs of teams from different stores in the chain and handwritten letters from customers and employees. "Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Cavendish has just arrived for the quarterly meeting," her assistant, Mariah, announced over the intercom. "Thank you. I'm on my way." In the main meeting room, executives from various sectors of the corporation were already positioning themselves for the results presentation. Anthony Cavendish, now 72 but still vigorous, was chatting animatedly with some directors when Louisa entered. "Ah, there's our revolutionary," he greeted with evident satisfaction. "Ready to surprise us again." Louisa smiled, already accustomed to the direct manner of the mentor who had transformed her life. "Just ready to show the results of thousands of people's work, Mr. Cavendish." The meeting began promptly. Various directors presented their numbers: sales, margins, expansion, logistics. When it was Louisa's turn, she stood up with the confidence of someone who deeply mastered her subject. 2 years ago, we began a cultural transformation that many considered too risky or idealistic. She began, activating the first slide of her presentation. "We decided to place human dignity at the center of our operation, betting that respect generates not only ethical, but also financial results." The numbers that appeared on the screen were eloquent. Customer satisfaction had jumped from 67% to an impressive 92%. Employee turnover had halved. Sales consistently increased quarter after quarter, exceeding the market average by more than 30%. But beyond the numbers, "We have stories," Louisa continued, moving to slides that showed real testimonials. Mrs. Mary Peterson, 78, who was afraid to shop alone and now feels welcomed in any unit. Young William, a wheelchair user, who found real accessibility in our stores, not just physical but also attitudinal. And our colleague Jane, who started as a cashier and today coordinates the project for the inclusion of people with disabilities. The room was silent, absorbing the impressive results of what many had initially considered a charity project without financial viability. Our Everyone is VIP program definitively eliminated discrimination based on appearance. The active listening training transformed complaints into loyalty opportunities, and the Inclusive Leadership Project created an internal talent pipeline that today accounts for 72% of our promotions. When Louisa concluded her presentation, the first to applaud was Anthony Cavendish, quickly followed by the other executives. The success was undeniable, not only in satisfaction indicators, but also, and perhaps primarily, in the financial results that validated the humanized approach. "Impressive as always." "Louisa," Anthony commented after the applause, "but tell us about the pilot project in Riverbend. Were we able to replicate the results?" Louisa smiled, knowing this was the most delicate part of her presentation. "The Riverbend pilot project was our biggest challenge yet. As everyone knows, we took over a store with a history of underperformance and high employee turnover. The previous management firmly believed the problem lay in the quality of the customers in the region." She then displayed a slide with the before and after of the unit, from its physical appearance, with a revitalized environment, to graphs showing the evolution of results. In just 6 months, we transformed the least profitable unit in the Northeast region into the 5th most profitable. And most importantly, we did this without changing the target audience, simply by changing how we treated them. Robert Miller, the ever-skeptical finance director, leaned forward. "I cannot deny the numbers are impressive, but I still have a question. How much of this success depends on you personally, Louisa? If you left tomorrow, would this model sustain itself?" It was a legitimate question, and one Louisa had expected. Instead of taking offense, she smiled. "An excellent question, Robert. Precisely for this reason, over the past 8 months, we have implemented the Cultural Multipliers program. In each unit, we identified and developed natural leaders who share our fundamental values. People who, like myself 2 years ago, perhaps didn't have the traditional resume, but possessed something more important: integrity and genuine empathy." She then displayed a map of Albion dotted with lights, representing the more than 400 culture guardians already trained and active. As proof of effectiveness, I can cite the Meadowbrook unit, which implemented the entire program without my in-person visit. only with remote support and the work of local multipliers. The results are in Appendix 3 of the report and are virtually identical to those of the units I personally visited. The presentation continued for a few more minutes, with Louisa answering questions and detailing specific aspects of the program. By the end, it was clear to everyone that the experiment had become a corporate success story worthy of study. After the meeting, Anthony invited Louisa for a private conversation in his office. Unlike her functional office, his was decorated with antique furniture and artworks that reflected his long career. On the walls, there were photos with important personalities, presidents, artists, business leaders, but also images of his family and the chain's first stores, when everything was still a small family business. "Sit down." "Louisa," he invited, indicating a comfortable armchair. "Coffee?" "Yes, thank you." As the assistant served coffee, Anthony observed Louisa with a contemplative gaze. "You know, when I saw you that day, offering to pay for a stranger's purchase, I immediately realized I was in the presence of someone special. But I confess that not even I could have predicted the impact you would have on our entire organization." Louisa felt her face warm with the compliment. Even after 2 years of recognition and promotions, she was still surprised when her journey was highlighted. "It was you who gave me the opportunity." "Mr. Cavendish, I merely did what I believed was right." The businessman smiled. "And that's precisely the point, Louisa. Many people know what is right, but few have the courage to act when it involves personal risk." He paused to take a sip of coffee. "That's why I want to discuss your future." Louisa felt a pang of apprehension. Despite all her success, a part of her, the poor girl from the suburbs who grew up hearing that people like her don't go far, still expected that one day everything would be revealed as a big misunderstanding. "My future? Yes, as you know, I will turn 73 next month. Although I feel well and energetic, I have been thinking more and more about the group's succession." Louisa nodded, knowing this was a delicate topic. Anthony had 2 children, Charles, 48, who served as Director of International Expansion, and Beatrice, 45, responsible for marketing and communications. Both were competent, though they had management styles quite different from their fathers. After much reflection and discussion with the board, we decided to create a new governance structure. Charles will assume the executive presidency, focusing on global growth strategy. Beatrice will be responsible for all operations in Albion, and I am proposing the creation of a vice presidency of corporate culture and values, which will report directly to the board. He paused significantly, observing Louisa carefully. "And I would like you to take on that position, Louisa." For a moment, she was speechless. Vice president, a position that would place her on the same hierarchical level as the founder's children. A responsibility she could never have imagined even in her most ambitious dreams. "Mr. Cavendish, I don't know what to say. It's an immense honor, but your children, would they accept it?" Anthony smiled. "It was Beatrice who suggested your name, actually." And Charles immediately agreed. "Both recognize the value you have brought and know that preserving our culture will be as important as expanding our business." Louisa took a deep breath, trying to process the magnitude of that moment. From cleaner to vice president in 2 years, a trajectory that defied all social statistics of Albion. "I deeply believe that what we have built is just the beginning," she continued after a few moments. "That we can create a business model that thrives precisely because it values every person, whether customer, employee, or community. That's exactly why you are the right person for the job, Louisa. You don't see this as a social project separate from the business. You understand that it is the very core of the business." That night, upon returning home, now a comfortable though not luxurious apartment in a middle-class neighborhood of Silverport, Louisa found her children gathered in the living room. Peter, now in his 3rd year of computer science, had developed an application for his final project. Julia was in her 2nd year of law and interned in the legal department of Dawnlight Corporation itself. Matthew, the youngest, was preparing for the university entrance exam for medicine, dreaming of specializing in community pediatrics. "So, Mom, how was the big meeting?" Peter asked, looking up from his laptop. Louisa smiled, deciding to save the promotion news for dinner. "It went very well. But before we talk about that, I want to hear your news." As she listened to her children's animated accounts of their studies, projects, and dreams, Louisa reflected on how a single decision, offering to pay for an unknown elderly man's purchase, had unleashed such a profound transformation not only in her life, but in the lives of so many others. That night, in her room, Louisa opened a small box she kept with affection. Inside was the yellowed receipt for the purchase she had paid for 2 years ago, $1,876.42, an amount that at the time represented an immense sacrifice. Anthony had insisted on reimbursing her the next day, but she had kept the receipt as a memento. In the same box was a handwritten card he had sent her a week after the incident. The message, simple but profound, was something she reread in moments of doubt. When everyone else saw only a ragged old man, you saw a human being. And it was that vision that changed everything. Never underestimate the power of a single gesture of genuine humanity. Carefully closing the box, Louisa thought of the hundreds of employees who had been promoted thanks to the internal talent development program. Of the thousands of customers who were now treated with dignity regardless of their appearance or financial status. Of the communities impacted by the social projects the company had consistently begun to develop. All of this born from a single moment of courage. The next morning, as she prepared for another day of work, Louisa observed her image in the mirror. At 44, her face still bore the marks of a life of struggles, but her eyes reflected something new, the serenity of someone who had found her purpose. On her way to the office, she made her usual detour, a stop at the New Dawn, the unit where everything had begun. She was no longer the invisible cleaner, nor the supervisor in training. She was the future vice president making her weekly visit, a commitment she religiously maintained. Upon entering, she was greeted with genuine smiles and respectful salutations, not because of the position she held, but because of the person she was. Walking through the aisles, she observed a scene that made her pause. An attendant patiently helping an elderly lady who seemed confused by the products. There was no rush or condescension in her service, only authentic respect. In another aisle, a young cleaning employee worked with concentration. Louisa approached. "Good morning," she greeted gently. "What's your name?" The young woman seemed surprised to be noticed. "Felicity, madam." "Felicity, you're doing an excellent job. Thank you for keeping our store so well maintained." The young woman's eyes widened with unexpected recognition. "Thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Everyone talks about you, that you started just like me." Louisa smiled. "And it's true. Never let anyone tell you that your work is less important or that you can't dream bigger." As she said goodbye, Louisa realized that there lay the true meaning of her journey. Not the promotions or recognitions, but the possibility of breaking cycles of invisibility and creating new virtuous cycles. A single gesture of dignity had unleashed a wave of transformations. A single person had proven that empathy and business success are not antagonistic concepts, but complementary ones, and at that moment, observing the activity of the store where her life had changed so dramatically, Louisa Fisher understood that her personal story had become something greater, a symbol of possibility and hope for so many others who, like her, were just waiting for an opportunity to show their worth. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that Louisa Fisher's journey has touched your hearts and shown the transformative power of a single gesture of humanity. For more stories that explore the depth of human relationships and the possibilities of transformation, we have prepared a special playlist that you can find by clicking the link to the left of the screen. If this narrative stirred emotions in you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like on this video. Every day we bring new stories that, like this one, remind us of the importance of seeing beyond appearances. Share in the comments if you have ever experienced or witnessed a moment that completely changed the course of a life.